Hello, I am here today with three wonderful women from Olympia, Washington, Joy, Kirsten, and Eileen. And they have all been practicing mutuality in their community of Olympia now since about 2012. And one of the ways that they practice mutuality is through Mutuality Circles. And I'm here, I didn't introduce myself, I'm Cielle Backstrom, a Trillium Awakening teacher. And I'm just here to ask them today, what are some tips they could give for ensuring that a mutuality circle is effective? And I mean, there's quite a lot of longevity that you have here. So there must be things you're doing that you've learned even through trial and error to make your groups as successful as possible. So I'd love to hear from each one of you. What are some tips you want to pass on?
I was going to say, I think the way that we begin each cycle of mutuality circles by reading our intention of why it is that we meet and that our purpose of meeting together, and some of the guidelines and even some like poetic readings about why this is of value has been really supportive to set the stage for the next stretch of meetings.
What I was going to say is that one of the things we do in our community is that we're very intentional about who's in our mutuality circle and who's not right now. And so one of the things that we do is that we ask someone who requests to join our circle to read CC Lee's guidelines for practicing mutuality, read our member agreements of what it means to be together in Olympia, to talk about the purpose of being in a mutuality circle. And we ask people to agree to those in writing before they're in the circle. And so we have a roster of who's in our circle, and we know that everyone in there has reviewed this information and agreed to it. So it's a container that we've built where we start that process right as someone says, hey, I'm really into Trillium. I hear you guys have this circle. I'd like to join it. We have this process for bringing them in.
And that also includes an expectation that they have had some time in already, because it has happened that someone's come to one sitting and they're revved up and excited and they want to be in the mutuality circle right away. But you know, there's a list somewhere of what we ask people to do before they join a mutuality circle. I don't know if either of you know it offhand, but it can include, going to a couple local sittings so that they start to meet some of the community, so they're not just coming into a mutuality circle, not maybe ever having met anybody else that's in it, and some sessions with the teachers and or some teacher, and different levels, different a whole list of things they could do, but a few things that we're asking people to do and to have some time in before they come into the space that's peer held.
Yeah, and one of the things that we ask actually is that people be a committed Trillium practitioner. Whatever that means to you. We're not inviting people into the mutuality circles who are dabbling and wondering. Mm-hmm. We want people after they've decided, at least for now in my life, this is my path. I'm committed to doing this. That's the people that we want to practice with. And other people have tons of resources available for them. It's just that for these circles, that's what we're looking for.
I really love hearing that you're actually, so some level of the due diligence we talk about that's part of this group, they've already done. I mean, we're always continuing on our kind of due diligence, along this path. It's just part of, seems to be the Trillium path. It's like, is this still working for me? How is it working for me? But you're asking people to have done, to not be doing the bulk of that while they've just joined a peer circle, that they will have done that through other means like sittings or working with a teacher or something like that. And then once they commit to, this is a path that I want to explore more with peers, then they can, so what does they have to apply or something to be joining a mutuality circle?
Yeah, they ask to join, and then we actually bring it to our coordinating circle to ask what do we know about this person? Do we feel like they're ready? And we might actually ask them, you know, we'd like you to go to a few more sittings first, or we'd like you to have a little more time in Trillium first. We may ask something of them, but we get kind of a sense of, you know, what do we all know in the coordinating circle about this person? So it's a joint decision whether to invite them to join. And then we have someone who's a role holder as an overall mutuality circle coordinator. And that person does a one-on-one talking through the agreements and the guidelines, and really asking the person, are you ready to commit to that? And then getting it literally in writing in an email. I agree to these things.
We do this because it's the peer circle is such a catalyst. It's such a, it's so profoundly intimate. And the work that we're doing in the mutuality circles is so tender, and many times as a person is going through the process of whole being realization, they're really vulnerable and really tender, and things can really feel like they're coming unglued, and even with the sacred unraveling. And so we really want a container where people can feel really safe and really know that they are a part of a group with other deeply committed practitioners, not someone who's just coming to check it out.
Mm-hmm. Right. And also, you know, a lot of people new to this work, it's new to them about not fixing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a new I mean, just go out into the world. People are always trying to fix each other, you know, and I sure did and was. And so for them to be able to grasp that concept and see it in practice and sittings before they come into the mutuality circle. I mean, the facilitator in a mutuality circle still is going to try to hold that, but we want people to have sort of a basic understanding of why that is and how to hold that energy that wants to fix somebody else. You know, I mean, we're all still in practice with it and it still comes up, but to have some experience with that, before entering that very tender and intimate space that's peer held.
Yeah, because I'm kind of getting that, you know, one of the values of these circles is when people can be in very tender and vulnerable places, but you need to make sure that there's a container to support that. So that's why you have these guidelines for kind of evaluating if someone feels like they'd be ready to be able to create a space in which some very deep, tender, vulnerable processes can just naturally unfold. It's beautiful.
You know, and the other thing that has come up is people who have been wanting spiritual community. They want community, and so they, you know, come to some sittings. They want to be in the peer group, but it's not. I mean, this is what you were speaking to, Joy. Not so much grounded in Trillium. They just want to be in a spiritual community, and then they have started talking about all kinds of other things. And having to kind of just keep bringing that in, that this really is a Trillium mutuality circle, that's really what we're focused and grounded on. And it doesn't mean that many of us aren't, you know, involved in other things, and sometimes those things weave in, but that's really our foundation. And just trying to be really clear with people up front about that. And that's that's what these groups are about.
The other thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is how we've struggled with and handled attendance at mutuality circles.
Right.
So when we were really small, there was one circle and you'd go if you could, you know, but there wasn't a sense of committing to being there. And it worked, I think. And at some point we got big enough that a couple things happened. One is we had trouble finding space that we could all be in, but we also started running up against something that happens, at least because we're such a small community, which is people have what we call dual relationships, where maybe there's somebody in the community that you have as a therapy client, And it would be really hard to be in a mutuality circle because of your client-therapist relationship. It would be really hard to be in a mutuality circle with each other. And there's privacy laws that say you can't tell anybody else that you have this person as a client.
Yeah.
So it became this kind of twofold thing. When our group got big and we started getting these relationships, we decided to break into 2 small circles. And that's where it became a little bit logistically difficult of how do we form those circles? How long do they last? And how do you navigate this dual relationship issue? So for us, there's some logistics around that. And what we came to is, for us, we have 2 sessions a year of 5 months each. And we ask people to commit to those 5 sessions and commit to a closed group that's no one else is going to join it after the 5-month session starts. You can commit to, this is the people who are going to be there. So that's been really working well for us. And the reason we do 2 5-month sessions is we found that summer people can't commit. So we have just for our community, it's worked out to do September to January, February to June. And then in July and August, we have a group, but it's the whole darn group, anybody who wants to come. We call it our large mutuality circle. And so that's worked really well for us. And it came out of, we got so big and we had this dual relationship issue. And that's worked really well, but it brings up a whole new set of logistics. And if any other community gets to the point of outgrowing one circle, I'd be happy to talk with them more about it.
Yeah, great. Thanks for offering to be a resource for those people that would have a similar concern. And then, so I understand, so then you shuffle the groups up every 5 months, but you're also,
Yep.
then whoever's doing the shuffling is keeping some of the dual relationships in mind in some way so that they can.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And then because the groups then because we divided up, are smaller, so often 6 to 8, could be 8 to 10, it depends on the session. But it really matters that everybody shows up. It really, it changes the group. If someone's not there, if someone misses once, that's one thing, but if they're not there several times and then they plop in and we only are meeting for 5 times. So especially in this last round or 2 in groups I've been in, we had to really ask a couple people to step out, actually, because they just weren't being able to come for whatever reason. And the way we have it set up is like you can opt out of one 5-month session and then opt in the next time when you're more available. But it really matters to the sense of the group that people show up.
Yeah,
as
it
best
sounds
they
like,
can.
yeah, and I really feel like then the group is you're holding each other accountable for particular needs of the group. But I love this flexibility. If this particular cycle doesn't work for you because you're going to miss several of the meetings, then let's plug you in the next time. So it's not like a forever, like, oh, you can never come back again, but this part of your life seems to be too busy. Let's plug you in to the next time. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It also gives us a natural twice a year of on-ramping new people. So we talked about somebody requesting to join. If someone requests to join right now, they can come to our large circles in the summer, but the next small circle they can join is actually not till September. That's just the way that's the way our cycle works. It wouldn't be the same necessarily in other communities that just had one circle, but that's just how it works for us.
Wow.
It also really helps to have really good facilitation. I mean, that's, I would say, a tip that if having somebody who's really charged with the task of tracking the time and keeping us on track with time and, making sure announcements are read and that gazing happens and that the time is split and that breaks are accounted for, that it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, then the people that have showed up, even though you're kind of being mutual accountable for making sure the container stays intact, there's a level of relaxation that other people can have, knowing that someone else is going to track those things for that particular meeting.
Mhm.
Well, it sounds good.
Yeah.
And so we have a process for people to become a facilitator. Yeah, and you know, that they have. I think that there's a hope that they've been involved with Trillium for at least a year. A preference that they've had their whole being realization, but not necessarily an absolute hard requirement, but some, you know, demonstration that they have some facilitation skills or can develop those. And so there's a bit of an on-ramping process for that. And then last year we had, for the first time, a one-day retreat for facilitators, where we talked about the challenges of facilitating, the gifts of it, did a whole bunch of practice of what we all felt most, I think everybody kind of felt was the hardest thing, is like, what happens when we have to sort of like intervene on some, you know, feedback gone awry. And you did some role plays and practice. And besides all the great information that came from that, it was so bonding for the facilitators and supportive, I think. Like, because it's not nothing, you know, to show up and facilitate. I mean, I feel different when I show up to a Mutuality Circle as facilitator than I do when I show up as a participant. You know, just holding that role a little, you know, just holding the circle even a little bit more. And so it was supportive that having that retreat. We're hoping to do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And also this, I'm hearing that this can also apply to virtual groups that might meet by something like Zoom or Skype or something like that they can also rotate.
Mm-hmm.
Who is it going to be that particular day that's going to be holding that sort of, you know, the structure for the day, and that there might be, and that it's of value to kind of have some, I don't know what the right word, a little training, maybe that's just the simplest way to do it. You know, there's an agreement about what people will do when they hold that role. So it's not just kind of random, and some people are, obviously people will have different skill sets, but it's kind of, they've all had a similar kind of orientation to what is required when you step into that role. I wanted to ask too, so then because you do it in person, is the facilitator also the host of the meeting, or do you divide that up as well?
Not necessarily. Yeah.
We usually
For
have
our circles,
place that is hosted. So there are people, usually because there's 3 groups, there's 3 people who commit to hosting for that whole cycle.
Okay.
And then the facilitation changes, but the site is the same.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's nice that
the other little logistics.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's nice that the facilitator changes month to month, because there is a way that it can happen where, just like in a sitting with a teacher, people sort of can start directing their sharing towards the facilitator, kind of giving them this power, or I don't know what to call that, but you know, just kind of projecting that on them, rather, you know, because the facilitator still appear, but holding that role for that time. So it's nice that that rotates. Because if I was facilitator for 5 in a row, I wouldn't want that.
Yeah, it's almost like you'd be moving into a kind of a pseudo teacher role that we're not holding. We're not teachers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say, just tip-wise, is just that in general, ours seem to follow an agenda that's similar to a lot of sittings that I've been to. And so for us, if anyone's wanting to use our agenda, it usually goes some kind of check-in, a short meditation, gazing, which we almost always use the Uchin organized gazing system available on YouTube. We've got a topic, announcements, a topic, and then shares that are divided up time-wise. We usually have a bell that rings a certain way through the share, like say it's a 12-minute share, you might have a bell at 3 minutes. And then that last period is when usually the participants will say whether they would like reactions from the other peer circle members. Go through that, including a break in the middle, and then end with some kind of checkout or closing ritual. So just for us, that's been working pretty well. I don't know if you guys have anything to add about just the flow.
That seems pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Works well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I'm also part of a Mutuality Circle here in Fairfield that has been, it's not like we had several of them running in Fairfield, but one that has some longevity since it started actually as a teacher, calling a teacher on a speakerphone, because we didn't even have things like Zoom and Skype way back then. But over the years, and it was pretty much committed group. A few people, if someone would move out, we'd usually invite another person in. But there's probably about 6 or 7 of us that have been almost continuously meeting during all of that time, even changing status to mentor and then to teacher and things like that. But we, and right now it's just completely active. Even though we have 3 teachers in the group, we act as peers. Nobody is the one that's, in control. We all are acting as peers, but we do use that particular gazing that we learned from Olympia. Which is great. If we, just that so that it's the idea that if people want to do this, is that everyone gazes with everyone once and only once, and also has an opportunity to also sit with themselves in a kind of internal, gaze. So it's really great. I know that for myself before that, I felt like there was some unnecessary anxiety that would arise if I didn't catch someone's eye. I'd think, oh, nobody likes me, or I got left out of this round and I have to be more aggressive to catch someone's eye. So I'm not saying that having to reflect on those things doesn't have some value, but it's somehow I'll do those other times of life, and to just have the gazing be so simple. Oh, I am going to gaze with everyone once and only once, unless they choose not to gaze, because some people just maybe need to take a break or something like that. But thank you for developing that particular system. It works really, really well. And if you only have 3 or 4 people in your group, then it's really not necessary. But if you start getting 5 or 6 or more, it's so helpful to have that structure so that you can just relax into the gazing instead of wondering, like, who should I gaze with next? So thank you. And you said it's on, is there a YouTube video on that?
There is a YouTube video.
Super. Okay, great. Great. What else kind of tips would any of you like to share with people? Now, I think one that I haven't heard, but maybe I can't remember if you said it today, but I know in our group, confidentiality is an extremely important, commitment that we make to each other. And that really allows people to get into those tender, vulnerable places of knowing we can just share everything and it will just stay in the group. But
yeah, and we are pretty consistent in extending that sense of confidentiality to the circle, so that if I'm, whether I'm at the snack table, on our break, or I run into someone in town, I don't bring up their share. That share happened in a moment in time within this container, and that's probably not where that person is anymore, or they don't necessarily want to talk about it outside of it. And there is that way you could say, hey, is it okay if I bring up something about your share? But absolutely having to ask and being pretty careful about that. So that confidentiality is, even between the 2 people that were there, is still kind of being mindful that what gets shared is being shared in the container in a certain way because of that container. Yeah.
really respecting each other's process. Thank you.
Well, thanks for bringing up confidentiality. Yeah, it's a big one.
Anything else?
Good snacks.
Chocolate.
One thing I was just going to add is just that there can be value in having a mutuality circle of 2 or 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
Like if anyone's thinking our community can't do what Olympia does because we don't have, 6 people, we don't have 30 people, whatever it is. I've been in mutuality circles with very few that have so much value, still using the structure and the container that we talked about. So I would encourage people, if you have 2 or 3 people, or if you can do something virtually, the value is still there. It is so rich.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too, because I do know a couple of ladies. They don't live in the same city. They've known each other since before they started Trillium work. But since they started the Trillium work, they do have conversations that they set up with each other, which are particularly, they call them their mutuality conversations. So like you might have other times where they just are more casual, but they really do. This particular phone call we're putting together, this is our mutuality time. So, and that same level of deep respect and deep listening and deep honoring of the other. They've been doing it for years. So, I think they call themselves Dharma sisters.
Nice.
I like it.
Because they want to really make sure that there's a sacredness about those particular, their Dharma sister meetings have a kind of sacredness about them. So they even label them as such that they know when they walk into that particular, phone call, that there's that kind of sacredness of mutual respect and honoring that's going to happen. So thank you for bringing up that point. We do need to have 2, but mutuality circles of 2 can be very, very rich. Otherwise, we also have, I remember one of our Trillium teachers, she's now moved into other areas of serving people, but she had a whole essay on mutuality with ourselves, talking about all the inner parts of us that also we come to know more and more as we progress in our awakening, that there's lots of disparate parts inside of us. And we have to be in impeccable mutuality with each of them as well. Give them space to be who they are. Give them space to show up in their truth, even if another part holds a different truth. So there can be mutuality just internal with one, but it's a whole different topic. So, thank you so much. It feels good to me. I'm happy to have this as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.